لیزتراس، نخست وزیر انگلستان 2022. ما بر سر یک دوراهی بین المللی برای آینده دموکراسی و آزادی هستیم. حیاتی است که مشعل آزادی را روشن نگهداریم. و تبریک میگویم به خانم رجوی به خاطر آنچه که انجام داده است برای ترویج آزادی و دموکراسی در ایران. من هرگز امید خود را به یک ایران آزاد و دمکراتیک از دست نخواهم داد و معتقدم که سرانجام آزادی و دموکراسی در ایران پیروز خواهند شد، چون وقتی مردم حق انتخاب داشته باشند آزادی را انتخاب می کنند.
Good afternoon, and it's fantastic to be here at the Free Iran World Summit, talking about this vital issue at this vital time. Because I believe that we are at an international crossroads on the future of democracy and freedom. I don't think that freedom and democracy has been under greater threat for decades. And it's vital that we keep the flame of freedom alive. And I congratulate Mrs. Rajvi on what she has done to promote freedom and democracy in Iran. We are facing a huge threat from rising authoritarian regimes across the world. And we have seen the Iranian regime crack down on dissent and protestations against their controls. The reality is, these regimes have all been emboldened because the free world hasn't done enough. After the Cold War, we were complacent. We allowed people to think that the fight for freedom was finished, that we had dealt with USSR, that we were now able to and work with authoritarian regimes. We erroneously believed that as countries got richer, that they would become freer and more democratic. But sadly, that wasn't true. And what the lesson we need to take from that is that countries that believe and people that believe in freedom and democracy need to work together, and we need to double down on our efforts. And the people here today understand that better than anyone, because you've faced the brutality of the Iranian regime. You know what it feels like to be persecuted by the IRGC. You know what it's like to speak freely. You know what it's like not to be able to have access to free media and understand what is going on in the world. You know what it's like when your basic rights, your basic humanity taken away from you. And that is ultimately what we are all fighting for. We are all fighting for the ability of people to make decisions about their own lives. And we know that ultimately people are not better placed than authoritarian states. And that's why I will never give up hope for a free, democratic Iran. And I believe that ultimately freedom and democracy will prevail in Iran, because that is ultimately what people want. Because when people are free to choose, they choose freedom. But the fact is, we in the free world have not done enough. Our governments have not done enough to stand up to these authoritarian regimes. There's been too much appeasement. There's been too much wishful thinking. There's been too much hope that things would change when it was evident that things were not going to change and have not changed. So we need to be clear that we won't continue to tolerate this tyranny. We won't treat these countries as part of the normal international system. They won't have access in the same way they had to our trade, to our opportunities, to our systems they've had in the past. We have to be very clear about that. And there are three things we should be specifically doing with respect to Iran. Make that very clear to the regime. First of all, Iran must not get nuclear weapons. That is absolutely vital. And they have been kicking the can down the road, claiming that they are interested in some kind of settlement. Meanwhile, they have been developing those nuclear weapons. We cannot continue to allow them to play the time. We must be tougher. That should include looking at and new ways of putting pressure on the regime, because we know how big if Iran was able to, the Iranian regime had its hands on nuclear weapons. The second thing we must do is we must back the brave women of Iran. It's hugely inspiring to see women under threat for their lives, for their futures, for their freedom, prepared to demonstrate against the appalling regime and the human rights abuses they're subject to. And we must back them in that fight and do what we can to support their equality as women, because you can't have a free society when half of the population are under huge restrictions. You can't have a successful country. Women aren't in control of their own lives. So we must back the women of Iran. And we must also work together as free democracies to stop the use of state hostage-taking and stop unfair detention taking place. I have seen how diplomacy has been subverted by the use of hostage-taking to try and get other political ends. And it's important that we are not played against each other as Western countries, but we work together to stop this appalling practice. And we have a clear strategy to make sure that we are not emboldening the regime, that we're not encouraging the regime, and that we're not appeasing the regime. It's very important that this conference is going ahead. It's very important that we are able to talk together. We are able to offer people hope for the future. Because in many ways, times look dark at the moment. We know that democracy is under threat around the world. We know that dictators have been emboldened by the actions that we haven't taken in the past. But what that means is now is the time for us to take that action. Now is the time to turn our backs on the accommodation and appeasement seen over the past few decades, and instead be much tougher, be much clearer, and be much more positive about the future of Iran and the future of other countries. I'm very encouraged by what I've heard today, by the level of international support for this movement, and I wish you all your best in the fight that you are having to get freedom and democracy to Iran. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.